Welcome back to the Operation Freedom YouTube channel. What we do here is shine the light of truth on the deep state. They hate that. We do it figuratively with our presentations. We do it literally with our sponsor's product, PatriotLegacy.com. PatriotLegacy.com, featured product of theirs, the Patriot Beacon. 6 overall lighting functions. In addition, solar powered, don't need batteries. You can charge your other devices like your phone from it. In addition, you got a compass, you got a window breaking hammer, and you got a seatbelt cutter. Plus, if those deep state dweebs get just a little bit too close to you, blast them with this. They're gone. Go to patrioticlegacy.com, patrioticlegacy.com. Get yourself, your kids, your grandkids, your car. Can carry it with you anytime. patrioticlegacy.com, the Patriot Beacon. Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to Operation Freedom Briefings. The goal of these briefings in my weekly radio show, Operation Freedom, is to provide you information the bought-off lamestream fake media will not touch. You can join us on the radio show. It's free. Every Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern. You can stream it live from davejanda.com. Just go to davejanda.com, go to the top middle portion of the homepage, hit and listen live, and you'll be exposed to, I believe, one of the best, if not the best, radio show in our country on a Sunday, 2 to 5 Eastern. Fantastic guests, fantastic analysis, and information the deep state and their tentacle, the bought-off lamestream fake media, does not want you to know. I hope you'll join us. In addition, we're also available at davejanda.com, the website, the free, the public side, and also the subscription side. Hope you'll decide to become part of our Freedom family, because by becoming a subscriber at $9 a month, you get the extra shows, the extra content, all the archives, our contributing editor section, our Department of Advanced Research show, our WTF show, our Insider Insight show, our healthcare series, which I believe you can't find anywhere else on the internet. But you also support this YouTube channel, so we can produce these. The radio show, with the huge costs we have in production and that, with the studio time, our air time, our engineering time, our producer's time, and then also with what we do on the website. My Thanksgiving show, about a historical perspective on Thanksgiving that was given to me by my mom, who was a history teacher, got tremendous positive feedback. And I'd like to do the same for Christmas. First of all, on behalf of all of us with Operation Freedom and the davejanda.com platform, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. And we hope each and every one of you have a very happy and very positive-filled 2020. It's a big year in 2020. And some might feel this is a bit of a dramatic statement, but I believe our country is on the line. It goes back to my Thanksgiving message. It really comes down to, as free market as we can get, capitalism, and hopefully that will become more freer and less crony capitalism as we progress in the next 4 years, versus out and out and frank socialism. But it's actually, if you listen to the interviews I've done with Dr. Michael Rechtenwald in our platform, the anti-PC professor, formerly from NYU, this is really what they're speaking about on the D side of the ledger, is communism, Marxism. That's our choice in 2020. What we're seeing now with this impeachment hoax is being run by puppets of the deep state. We've talked about the deep state since the inception of the Operation Freedom radio show in October 2010. At first, when we talked about it, our general manager, Linda Hughes, was inundated with phone calls saying, yeah, this is really a really good show, but wow, there's a lot of conspiracy theory here. Janda and his guests talk about this deep state. This deep state, what? Deep state? These folks are a little off. No, we were right. The deep state exists and has existed for many decades' time. And part of their business model is chaos. Because out of chaos, they get more money, more control, and more power. It's been a very effective business model for them. And that's what a big part of this impeachment hoax is about. It's about chaos. It's about them feeling that they're losing control, they're losing power, and their revenue sources are drying up. That's what this whole Ukraine issue is about. I've gone into great detail on this in our subscription side of the platform about what Ukraine is all about. In short, it's a money laundering operation that benefits the Republicrats, the one political party in Washington. There are not two political parties. There's one. And there's a very small number of people fighting that. And that small party that's fighting it is led by Trump, President Trump. Rudy Giuliani just returned from Ukraine. He's presenting a lot of information on Ukraine. But what it all comes down to is a money laundering operation of your and my tax money that's going to not just Ukraine, but all these countries where this money goes to. There's a backwash coming, and that has been occurring for decades. And it's going right into all these politicians' pockets or their family pockets or these institutes that they set up that they benefit from. Many people wonder, hey, this congressman's making 100-some thousand a year, or the senator's making a couple $100,000 a year, or $300,000 a year. How after 10 years do these Congress critters have $30, $40, $50 million? That's all that we know about that's divulged. It's because of the money laundering operation that's been occurring over decades and decades' time of our tax money that's being backflowed into all these deep state puppets' pockets. In 1988, when I first went to Washington to work on healthcare policy, I was at a meeting at the White House, and then we were going to lunch, and I was speaking with a very, very well-known politician. And I asked this politician the following question. What percentage of people in D.C. are either being bribed or blackmailed or controlled or leveraged? And the answer to me was 99%. 99%. 1988. This is why we saw the fake Russian collusion hoax, the fake Ukraine hoax, the fake impeachment hoax. The deep state is panicked about losing power and control. And every time they do, they inflict chaos. This was first taught to me by my mom, Ruth Janda, the history teacher, who not only told me about that and taught me about that Thanksgiving story. And if you haven't seen it, go back to the video archives here on YouTube, and it's there. And listen to it. A lot of folks found a lot of value in that and shared it with their family members. My mom taught me that and she didn't call it deep state. She called them the Syndicate. That when the Syndicate got in trouble, what they did is they created conflict. And in particular, when they really got concerned and worried about their status, they started wars. And what she said was, if you look at every major war that has occurred, it has all been at the hands of the Syndicate, or in our terms nowadays, the deep state. But she said every once in a while, you'll see people come to that realization that are involved in the war process and step forward and take a jab at the deep state. And here's the story she told me about. It involved World War I, and it involved Christmas. This was recently discussed, actually, by Mike Dash at Smithsonian.com. And it's very similar to the story that she told me. Here's what Mike Dash said, and it goes back to World War I, and people realizing, wait a minute, what are we doing here? What's going on? Here it is. Even at the distance of a century, no war seems more terrible than World War I. In the 4 years between 1914 and 1918, it killed or wounded more than 25 million people. A war than any other war before or since. Yet there were still odd moments of joy and hope in the trenches of Flanders and France. And one of the most remarkable came during the first Christmas of the war. A few brief hours during which men from both sides on the Western Front laid down their arms, emerged from their trenches, and shared food, carols, games, and comradeship. Were you ever taught that in your history classes? I wasn't. The only person I ever heard it from was my mom, this story. Their truce, the famous Christmas truce, was unofficial and illicit. Yeah, the deep state didn't want that. They wanted all of us useless eaters. Look, when we say 25 million died, we think, oh my God, that's devastating. It's horrible. The deep state was like, yeah, 25 million useless eaters dead, and we made money off of it, and we got more power, and we got more control. Perfect. Their truce, the famous Christmas truce, was unofficial and illicit. Many officers disapproved, and headquarters on both sides took strong steps to ensure that it could never happen again. While it lasted, though, the truce was magical, leading even the sober Wall Street Journal to observe, quote, "What appears from the winter fog and misery is a Christmas story, a fine Christmas story that is, in truth, the most faded and tattered of adjectives. Inspiring," end quote. The first signs that something strange was happening occurred on Christmas Eve at 8:30 p.m. An officer of the Royal Irish Rifles reported to headquarters, quote, "Germans have illuminated their trenches and are singing songs and wishing us happy Christmas. Compliments are being exchanged, but I am nevertheless taking all military precautions," end quote. Further along the line, the two sides serenaded each other with carols, the Germans' Silent Night being met with a British chorus of First Noel. And scouts met cautiously in no man's land, the shell-blasted waste between the trenches. The war diary of the Scots Guards records that a certain Private Merker, quote, "met a German patrol and was given a glass of whiskey and some cigars, and a message was sent back saying that if we didn't fire at them, they would not fire at us." In other words, deep state, warmongers, take a hike. This is Christmas. Several factors combined to produce the conditions for this Christmas truce. By December 1914, the men in the trenches were veterans, familiar enough with the realities of combat to have lost much of the idealism that they had carried into the war in August, and most longed for an end to bloodshed. The war they had believed would be over by Christmas, yet they were in Christmas still there, muddled, cold, and in battle. Then on Christmas Eve itself, several weeks of mild but miserably soaking weather gave way to a sudden hard frost, creating a dusting of ice and snow along the front that made the men on both sides feel that something spiritual was taking place. Just how widespread the truce was is hard to say. It was certainly not general. There are plenty of accounts of fighting continue the Christmas season in some sectors, and others of men fraternizing to the sound of guns firing nearby. One common factor seems to have been that Saxon troops, universally regarded as easygoing, were the most likely to be involved and to have made the first approaches to their British counterparts. Quote, "We are Saxons, you are Anglo-Saxons," one shouted across no man's land. "What is there for us to fight about?" The most detailed estimate made by Malcolm Brown of Britain's Imperial War Museums is that the truce extended along at least 2/3 of the British-held trench line that scarred southern Belgium. Many, perhaps close to the majority of the thousands of men who celebrated Christmas 1914 together, would not live to see the return of peace. But for those who did survive, the truce was something that never, ever would be forgotten. 1914. The warriors said, "What are we doing this for? A bunch of warmongering deep state dweebs." But then they were pushed back at it again. And then Joe Schutte from the Telegraph. The forgotten Christmas truce the British tried to suppress. 1914. The next year, 1915. New research has uncovered the most detailed account yet of the banned 1915 Christmas truce, where British and German soldiers defied official orders to make peace in no man's land. Again. As night descended over the Western Front on Christmas Eve, the guns fell silent and carols drifted across no man's land. The Germans opened up first, singing hymns learnt in their native Rhineland and Bavaria before the British responded, belting out "Good King Wenceslas." At first light on Christmas Day, the soldiers emerged unarmed from their trenches and met halfway across the muddy killing fields, shaking hands, exchanging buttons, sausage, and tins of bully beef. There was even a raucous football match, 50 aside, that night. Fairy lights and braziers were hauled over the parapets for the singing to continue. This, of course, a story we are all familiar with. But the events described above did not take place during the Christmas truce of 1914, one of the most famous and documented stories of World War I, but actually occurred the next year in 1915. Despite the strict orders of British and German commanders to the contrary, exactly the same thing occurred the following year in 1915. But this second unofficial truce was suppressed in its entirety. The deep state did not want this to get out to the masses, to the public. A final act of defiance and humanity whitewashed from history. There has been anecdotal evidence previously, but not until now has the full story of one unit's experience and the recriminations that follow been revealed. It has been compiled by Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley. He has been poring over the diaries of members of the 15th Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers, which found itself on the front line of Christmas Day 1915, but the missing link to his research was provided by a previously unseen diary belonging to Robert Keating, a private with the Royal Welsh, donated to the collection by a friend of his. It gives, says Riley, quote, "a remarkable blow-by-blow account of the truce British High Command never wanted anybody to read about." The order went along the lines in December 15th, almost immediately after the controversial General Sir Douglas Haig became Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force. There was to be no repeat of the unauthorized truce of 1914. Soldiers were warned. Nothing of the kind is to be allowed this year. The Germans, meanwhile, explains Riley, were told any fraternizing with the enemy would result in execution. What happened? They defied their orders. And it happened again. The useless eaters on the front line, as the deep state defined them, stood up. And if you will, gave the finger to the deep state. How remarkable that Christmas season was in 1914 that my mom told me about. How remarkable that Christmas season in 2015 by Joe Schutte. How remarkable. But the war continued. Those on the front line were persecuted for being involved in those Christmas events. Meanwhile, while the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers all sat back and drank their cognac, had wonderful family events because none of their family members would ever see war. They would only profit from it. The deep state continued to grow. Many people say, why has no one stood up recently, spoken about this, taken on the deep state, about war? Well, if you listen to some of the individuals I brought to my show, Admiral Ace Lyons, General Tom McInerney, General Paul Vallely, all have talked about the ravages of war, have all been intricately involved in trying to prevent war. The latest being General Paul Vallely, who, when during the Barack Obama administration, tried to instigate a war in Syria, Paul took a team to Syria and actually held negotiations. And I believe if it were not for General Paul Vallely, we would have entered into another world war at the very tail end of the Obama administration. But there was another warrior, Smedley Butler, who was the most decorated of all Marines in U.S. history. 2 Medals of Honor. He authored a book in 1935 entitled War is a Racket. He was a major general in the Marines. See, long story short, Smedley Butler pointed out that the banksters, the deep state, the globalist syndicate use war to kill millions of us that they call useless eaters, and to gain more power and control and more money. Listen to what he said in his book. War is just a racket. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to be to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the masses. I wouldn't go to war again, as I have done to protect some lousy investment of the bankers. There are only 2 things we should fight for. One is the defense of our homes, and the other is the Bill of Rights. War for any other reason is simply a racket. It may seem odd for me, a military man, to adopt such a comparison. Truthfulness compels me to. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service as a member of this country's most agile military force, the Marine Corps. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general. And during that period, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for their version of capitalism. I suspected I was just part of a racket at the time. Now I'm sure of it. Like all the members of the military profession, I never had a thought of my own until I left the service. My mental faculties remained in suspended animation while I obeyed the orders of higher-ups. This is typical with everyone in the military service. During those years, I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. Looking back at it, I feel that I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts in the Midwest. I operated on 3 continents. There are individuals taking on the deep state and their racket every day, every minute of every day. You'll never get that from the bought-off lamestream fake media. You'll never hear the story of 1914 on the bought-off lamestream fake media, or 1915, or Smedley Butler, or about General Paul Vallely. But you'll hear about it here. This is the Christmas season. It's the time for all of us to embrace our families, our loved ones, our friends, all of you. It's a special time. We cannot let the deep state divide us. We need to take the lesson home from those men in the trenches in 1914 and 1915 and not forget it. It's a very special year coming up. On behalf of all of us, I wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and a very Happy New Year. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thank you for your time today.